The air is too cold, too filtered, like a hospital trying to hide what happens inside. You hand over your badge and your phone. A man in plain clothes checks your name against a printed list. No windows, no signage, just doors that lock behind you. This is your life, level by level, inside a black site interrogation program. Homicide detective consultant, solving the case with someone else holding the evidence. Fluorescents buzz above a table bolted to the floor. Your notepad is allowed. Your pen is counted on the way in and on the way out. They slide you a thin file. Photocopied interviews, grainy stills, a timeline with gaps you're not supposed to ask about. The building smells like bleach and burnt coffee. A case officer stands behind you, silent, reading your face. You build profiles the way you always have: motive, stressors, contradictions. But the questions they want aren't about what happened. They're about who to pin it on. You tell yourself it's just consulting. You tell yourself you're only interpreting behavior. You tell yourself the facts will survive the pressure. Then you notice the edits. Names blacked out where context should be. Dates that don't line up. A transcript that skips the exact moment a detainee denies knowing anything. When you flag it, the case officer says, calm as a clerk, "We need a usable assessment by 1700. You came to solve a murder, and you're handed a story with the ending already written. Your job is to make it sound true. Site interrogator, where the room shapes the answer before you ask. They walk you through the corridors without speaking. Painted cinder block, cameras in corners, a heavy door with a slot at eye level. Inside, the room is spare. Drain in the floor. A ring bolt set into concrete, a metal chair with no padding. There's a medical officer nearby, not in the room, but close enough that you can hear the cartwheels and the snap of latex gloves. You're trained on a schedule that runs like a shift. Sleep logs, calorie counts, compliance, check marks. You learn the approved stress positions. You learn how to keep a man standing until his knees shake. You learn how sleep deprivation makes speech slur, how cold air makes teeth chatter. You tell yourself you're preventing an attack. You tell yourself the guidelines are legal. You tell yourself the doctor's presence means it's controlled. Senior operatives watch through glass you can't see through. They correct your tone. They push for breakthroughs. You hear names: Mitchell, Yesin, like citations, like permission. And the detainee starts answering the way a body answers pain, not the way a mind answers truth. You don't pull information out of a person here, you press a shape into them and call it a confession. Detainee program officer, where paperwork turns decisions into procedures. Your desk is inside the wire now. A locked cabinet for medical summaries. A dedicated printer that spits out forms with classification stamps and version numbers. You juggle multiple detainees like case files, status boards, interrogation plans, incident reports. Every action has a checkbox. Every checkbox has a memo behind it. You sit with legal advisors who speak in clean, careful sentences. Within the guidance, consistent with the OLC. Document the necessity. You draft the plan. You schedule the sessions. You record durations, recovery periods, the exact language of warnings. You tell yourself the signatures protect you. You tell yourself the memos draw a bright line. You tell yourself that if it's authorized, it's not your burden. But authority feels like a chain you wear around your own throat. If the intelligence is thin, you're asked why. If a detainee deteriorates, you're asked whether the protocol was followed. If headquarters wants a name, a location, a date, you learn how quickly, not enough, becomes, try again. You stop asking what's true and start asking what will stand up in a file, because the file is what survives you. You've learned the rooms, the forms, the approved limits. Next, you inherit the whole site, the staff, the incidents, the arguments, and you find out how lonely command feels behind locked doors. Black Site Commander. You run the facility where deniability is a workflow. The morning starts with metal keys and a radio check. You walk the perimeter in a windbreaker with no insignia, past a generator shed, past a Conex container stacked with bottled water, past the armory log that has to balance to the round. In the operations office, a whiteboard lists first names only, meal windows, medical clears, and which cells are active. You take briefs from guards, medics, interrogators, and the one communications tech who keeps the satellite link alive. Your job is to make the place run without leaving fingerprints. You sign chain of custody sheets. You approve restraints. You arbitrate arguments over minutes 45 versus 60, ice water versus cold air, permitted versus effective. You tell yourself you're just managing risk. You tell yourself you're keeping standards. You tell yourself your distance makes you safer. Then an incident lands on your desk. A swollen wrist, a cracked tooth, a fainting spell on camera with the audio conveniently low. Headquarters asks for a narrative by Cobb, and the narrative can't include doubt. You learn command here isn't power, it's being the lock that never admits it turned. Program architect. You design the machine and call it a framework. You don't smell bleach anymore. You smell toner, hot plastic, and the burnt edge of a secure shredder. The conference room is windowless in a different way: carpet, a speakerphone, a stack of binders labeled with bland titles and annex letters. On the table, behavioral science notes, medical constraints, legal language, and a grid that turns a human day into blocks. You build what others will follow. You draft escalation ladders. You specify maximum durations, recovery periods, documentation standards, and what counts as non-compliance. You write talking points for briefers and a one-page summary for leadership that uses careful verbs: disrupt, degrade, validate. You tell yourself you're professionalizing chaos. You tell yourself you're preventing improvisation. You tell yourself the rules are mercy. But every line you write becomes someone's permission slip. A footnote becomes a technique. A definition becomes a loophole. When questions come back, can we extend? Can we combine? You realize the program doesn't ask what should happen. It asks what can be justified. You don't design rooms at this level, you design the reasons the rooms exist. Retired strategist. You leave the site, but you never leave the vocabulary. Your badge is gone, replaced by a lanyard at a think tank and a parking pass that opens a different kind of gate. You sit on panels under soft lighting. You answer questions in trimmed sentences. You keep your hands folded when you talk about lessons learned, about oversight, about post-9/11 authorities, like their weather patterns. At home, a locked filing cabinet holds nothing you're allowed to show, and that emptiness has weight. People still call. A former colleague asks how to frame a memo. A staffer asks what language survives a hearing. A journalist asks for off the record, as if that phrase is a talisman. You tell yourself it's over. You tell yourself you're only advising. You tell yourself the distance makes it history. Then a phrase from your own documents shows up in someone else's mouth, years later, polished and reusable. You recognize it instantly: the cadence, the escape hatch, the way it slides past the hard part. Retirement is just a quieter room, and the questions still know your name. At every level, the doors close the same way: soft, final, practiced. You trade questions for procedures, then procedures for language, then language for legacy. The program teaches you a craft: how to make certainty out of pressure and paperwork. Rank only changes what you hold in your hands: keys, forms, briefings, while the weight stays in the same place, behind your ribs.